there's thunder, there's lightning. John Nada. You know, one of the things that I can recall growing up with myself and with many of my friends and a lot of the friends that I still currently have, one of the things that we all went through, that we all faced, was this anxiety about women and relationships. Because there's a set of things we have to live up to. There's this list that we have to complete in order to be successful with women. I mean, look at what PUA teaches. Look at a lot of what the red pill trademark teaches in terms of how to be successful with women. But they never answer the question of, why is it important to be successful with women? Why is this something that we should concern ourselves with or worry about or spend a whole lot of time thinking about and having any kind of anxiety over? Because that's the thing about Mgtow, is that it's freed us from this anxiety. It's freed us from this need to have to measure up, or even the desire, or even the want to measure up. I mean, and Invention put out a video the other day, which I think says it pretty succinctly, that when we're in our younger years, and many people in Mgtow now are in their early 20s, late 20s. I know that I really didn't become Mgtow. I really didn't start internalizing these truths that I learned, these teachings that I heard into a way of life until, you know, much later in life. I spent much of my 20s, especially the early part of the 20s, still in that rat race, still in that chase, and in that mindset of the need to have kids, the need to have a family, the need to be married, but never really stopping and asking myself the question of, why would you ever get married? Why would you need to be married? Now, there were certain points in my life that I think, I don't know, it's kind of the chicken before the egg thing. It's kind of the nature versus nurture thing, because there were a lot of points in life when I was much younger, you know, in my teenage years and somewhat into my 20s, where I did have these passing thoughts about how boring it would be just to be another person that gets married and have kids. You know, that's your life. You know, that, you know, you go to your job 9 o'clock and leave at 5, and you come home and you do the whole family thing. I mean, as much as many of us wanted that, and as much as I think that we wanted it because it gave a semblance of security and a semblance of stability, there was still that part of me that was like, you know, if I go and do that, life's pretty much over. I mean, you've got to spend the next, you know, 18 years or whatever raising these kids, and then on top of that, it's not as if you can just go and spend your money how you want to, or spend your time how you want to, or strike out on a new career, or strike out on, you know, some new dream or some new skill or whatever that you want to learn, because your time is tied up within the family. But going back to this point, there's no longer this worry of, well, I've got to go to the gym because, you know, I need to look a certain way in order to impress women, or I've got to spend X amount of hours at work so I can make X amount of dollars in order to buy this type of clothing, or in order to be able to afford this type of trip. You know, it's no longer about pleasing somebody else or living my life for other people. And, you know, it's one thing to live your life for people that you know. It's one thing to live your life for people that have some sort of investment in you, and you have some sort of investment in them. But to think about it, it's very ludicrous that many of us were living our lives for people that we didn't even know their names. We were living our lives for people that didn't, you know, we didn't interact with or even talk to on an everyday basis. They were just maybe somebody we went to school with, or maybe they were just somebody, you know, in the future out there in the ether somewhere that we didn't even know. And we were living our lives on the off chance that we were going to meet this, you know, for this future person, that, you know, we are preparing ourselves to have this life and to look this way and to be this way for somebody that might come along later, yet not living our lives for ourselves, not living our lives and living up to the potential that we have. And one of the things that oftentimes gets brought up about Mgtow and about those that are in the Mgtow lifestyle, of course, all the shaming language and how miserable Mgtow men must be and how lonely Mgtow must be and how their lives, you know, are feckless lives and not important and just these miserable existences that Mgtow must live. And yet, if you talk to most of the guys that are Mgtow, that are out here just living their life, you'll see that that's quite the opposite. You'll see that many of these men are happy, joyful, contentful, and most importantly, are at peace with the decisions that they've made and with the life that they've chosen. But I can say that that's not the same for many married guys that I've talked to and many married people, many married men that I've run into in my goings and comings in life. How happy are these married guys really? Sure, when the wife's there, standing next to them, you know, hand on shoulder, yeah, they'll probably stand there and tell you everything's great, everything's wonderful. But when you really think about it, statistically, how many happy marriages could there actually be out there? When you look at the divorce rate, the numbers betray the lie that marriage will make you happy. The numbers betray the lie that there are all these people out there living these wonderful, happily married lives, because it simply cannot be and is not the case when you look at statistics of the divorce rate. And more anecdotally, when you talk to guys that actually are married. I mean, how many times have you heard, I can't go out this week because the wife says I can't. I'd like to get this, but the wife says I can't spend the money. So on and so forth. Now, I can't imagine, you know, that anybody is really happy with that kind of existence, that kind of control over their lives. Yet how many of those men can turn around and truly tell their wives how much money they're allowed to spend, or who they're allowed, you know, how many hours a week or a month or whatever they're allowed to spend with their friends? I don't imagine that the road goes both ways in those instances. And going back to what I mentioned earlier about many of us having to come to these truths later on in life, we spent a vast amount of time looking for happiness because we thought that if we got a girlfriend, or we thought, you know, well, once I get a fiance and get that whole thing kind of squared away in life and get married, you know, that's where the happiness is going to be. Then I'll be contented. Then I'll be at peace. But what many of us never stopped to think about was, why did we think that we would find happiness and peace with somebody else or within the idea of marriage? Why did we think that marriage would all of a sudden change everything in our lives and make them better and more joyful and happier? Because what I realize now, and what many of you realize now, is that we were being sold something that doesn't exist. We were being sold an idea that isn't manifest in the physical reality. And many of us never stopped to think, never stopped to realize that the only reason we were doing most of this is because that's what we were told to do. That's what we had been sold. That was the programming. And we didn't know that there was another option out there. We didn't know that it was even possible to go your own way until we happened to stumble upon it. And so we spent a lot of time doing things for other people, for the benefit of other people, looking a certain way, being a certain way, doing things not because they benefited us and made our lives better and made us better people, but because we wanted to impress somebody else that may or may not have even known that we existed. And we wanted to do it on a gamble, much in the same way playing the lottery, on the gamble that we would be happy, that we would be content, that we would find this peace, because that's what we were told. And yet that's a lot of time down the drain now. You've got to sit there and think, what does it benefit somebody else? You know, that is one of the things that I've learned here recently. Although that it should be common sense. It should be pretty evident. But this is something that I've learned in the last, maybe 4 or 5 years. When someone is trying to get you to do something, stop and ask yourself this question. What benefit do they get out of it? Because really, what do most people care what somebody else does, unless it in some way affects them negatively or positively? So then you must ask yourself the question of, why do they need you to have kids and be married? Why is society so adamant on whether or not I reproduce and whether or not I take some woman on and provide for her? Where is the benefit? What is it that they need me to do for them? And if you think about it, once again, as I sort of alluded to earlier, is that marriage and children limit you in many ways. They need you to have kids and be married so that you can be kept in line. Because if you have kids, if you're married, your options are limited. And the degree of BS that you're willing to put up with at a job, the degree of BS that you're willing to put up with from society is a lot higher than if you're a free man, if you're a man going your own way. Because you need that BS job. You got to have the job to keep the wife happy so she doesn't take you to divorce court and clean you out. You've got to have that job to provide for those kids. It's a control mechanism. It's to keep you in line. It's to keep you from wandering off and to keep you producing. Producing and consuming for whose benefit? Not yours, but theirs. Why would you ever get married? I mean, what possible benefit? When you really sit there and think about it, and I know a lot of you guys, I mean, how many Mgtow videos have we all seen by this point? And at a certain point, I think we're all just echoing and repeating one another in terms of the benefits and the negatives, the pros and cons to marriage, of which there are many negatives, but not so many positives. And so at what point do you even have to ask the question anymore of should or shouldn't I get married? Because now the question is, why would you ever get married? Again, you've got this dynamite living within your house that can go off at any time and take away your freedoms and liberties with but a phone call. And not only that, but just all the other things that have been mentioned about. I mean, look at most of the marriages. Most of the marriages do not go past 10 years. It's not like it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago or whatever, where when people got married, they more or less stayed together, either A, because they wanted to, or B, because they had to. There was no other way. But they've streamlined the process. They've made it so much so more easy to end that supposedly unendable bond. And so you could put in all the effort, all the work, make all the sacrifices, be a great husband, great father, be a great provider, and in the end, the only things that you're likely to get is losing half, if not more, of the things that you've worked your life to earn and the stability that you've tried to build for yourself. You find yourself going from the big house, the big mansion, to the little studio apartment. And for what? What benefit did you gain versus the possible side effect of marriage? What did you get in marriage that you couldn't get by simply playing the field and remaining single and continuing to go your own way? The anxiety is gone. The worry is gone. Mgtow is that raft that we have used to get across the Great Divide. And it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. It's growing. And it's trickling down, like I said, to the younger generations faster. Whereas before we were but a small illumination in the dark, now we are a great inferno. Guys, go your own way or don't. The choice is yours.